In the fast-growing South Chungcheong province, the city of Asan stands tall as the second largest city in the province per population. South Chungcheong province has become an economic powerhouse since their explosive growth starting from the year 2001. As of today, the GDP per capita hovers near $60,000. But hidden from the new buildings rising and the new state-of-the-art train stations and transportation hubs are the crumbling farming villages that once stood proud as the jewels of the province in the days of the past. I was born and raised in one of those proud villages that are fast becoming extinct on the outskirts of Asan City. The decline of the farming villages started long before I was born. I'm 39 today, so even when you go back to the late 1970s, young people were already packing their bags for their permanent journey to Seoul to escape the life of a farmer. Today, I'm the youngest in my village, and I'm fairly confident when I say this, I'm probably the youngest male in the entire province's farm villages. All of my friends from childhood have moved to Seoul, Incheon, or Busan. Starting from the 70s, South Korea was fast becoming industrialized, and farmers no longer prioritized working their children in the field, but rather they did everything they could to get them out of farming business to join the economic revolution. But still, growing up, I was surrounded by children of all ages. The complete exodus of young people still hadn't taken place, and no one really foresaw how barren the farming villages would become one day. My parents were no exception to the trend, and they too invested heavily in my education. I studied as hard as my parents had worked on the field. I always felt it was the only way I could repay them for their sacrifice. I've twice won the province-wide math competition and always had the highest grade among my peers. When college knocked on my door, I was accepted to Seoul University, my first choice and my parents as well. My parents were so happy they actually threw a huge party and invited everyone in the village. They've always said it was the happiest day of their lives. I've moved in with my uncle while attending college when I first arrived in Seoul. I felt like a foreigner in my own country. The tall buildings and the sheer number of people in cars were so alien to me. But being young has its advantages. It didn't take long for me to get used to all of that, and eventually everything felt natural. It was summer of my second year in college. I planned to spend the summer vacation in my hometown helping my parents in the field, only this year my cousin wanted to come with for a week. My cousin Song grew up in the city and he hadn't visited my hometown since he was 12. I remember when he used to visit, he was always giddy like a kid on a camping trip. It was no different this time, even though he was a freshman in college and all grown up. By day 5 though, I could tell he already missed the bright lights of the city. On the 6th night, I said to my cousin that we should get drunk to celebrate the last night of his stay, and he happily obliged. Between me, my cousin, and an old friend, Kim, who was still residing in my hometown at this point in time, we had emptied 6 bottles of soju and were pretty drunk. We drank near an empty field, which used to be a farm back in the days. It used to belong to the Kang family until every member of that family died one by one. It had occurred before my time, so my knowledge of the Kang family doesn't come from my own account. But word is, the family had angered an old spirit of this town by farming on a land that was cursed by a woman who was raped and murdered on the land in the early 1800s. Out of respect or out of fear, who knows why, but it's a fact that the land hadn't been cultivated for centuries until the Kang family. Ever since the last member of the Kang family passed away, there have been rumors that a ghostly woman called out the names of the Kang family whenever it rains. They say she comes out when it rains because she was raped and murdered on a rainy day. But regardless of the weather condition, one rule that every villager always followed was to never say your name in the field, because if you do, you and every member of your family will all succumb to death under questionable circumstances. It was one of those things that not everyone believed in, but no one wanted to test the curse that was told generations after generations. Then, to a degree, it was proven to be true by the demise of the Kang family. So imagine three young men drunk, trying to outdo one another with one exaggerated story after another. I say I beat this guy up in high school, then my cousin follows it up saying, I beat up two guys in high school, and so on. You get the picture. In the middle of our conversation, my friend stands up abruptly and says, I don't believe in the ghost woman in the field. In fact, even if she were real, she wouldn't dare touch me. I think she'd fall in love with his handsome face. I laughed at what he said, but my cousin didn't understand what he was talking about. So I explained to Song about the curse, and he too gets up and says to my friend, I think you're full of shit. You talk the talk, but I bet you can't walk the walk. For $100, I'll walk into the field and say my name. If you can do the same, I'll double the money and give you $200. Call me a pussy, but I didn't want my cousin to do it. So I say to him, Song, I've lived with you for almost 2 years. I know you got the balls to do what you say, but just don't. It's not about bravery or cowardice. It's about respecting the land and the dead. You don't make bets on people and on the lands where people died tragically. My cousin's facial expression speaks to me that he understands what I just told him, but my drunken friend can't seem to repress his pride and barks back at my cousin. I don't even need the money, so fuck the money. I'm gonna show you that I've got the balls, and I'm gonna watch you do the same. If you can't do it, then you'll kneel down in front of me and admit that you're a pussy. I try to stop both of them, but the animosity and pride has already built up beyond retreat. Both of them advance towards the field, and I realize it isn't something that I can stop. They are in the middle of the cursed field, and my cousin takes the lead. My name is Song Yong-il, and I'm not afraid of any ghost. They stay quiet for a while, and my cousin says, See, it's all bullshit story to scare the kids to go home at night. Promptly after my cousin says those words, my friend follows through with his promise and says, My name is Kim Jin-ho. I'll give you a kiss if you show up tonight. He too waits for a while, then says, Apparently we've been drinking with a woman. He then points at me and says, That right there is a big vagina. Both my cousin and friend laugh their asses off and they get off the field. We all slept together that night and my friends, and we all woke up alive the next morning, albeit a little late. Neither my cousin or friend seemed too caught up with what they did the night before. I found this surprising since I didn't even call out my name, and I felt worried is too strong of a word. I guess I was just bothered by what they did. We had breakfast together, then my cousin and I said goodbye to my friend, and we went back to my parents' home after that. My cousin had to take the 3 o'clock bus, so after a quick lunch, I drove him to the bus station in my dad's truck. I saw him get on the bus. He was smiling and he looked fine, so I told myself, I guess I was a big vagina after all. How disappointing. Later that night, I received the most difficult phone call I had to answer. It was my uncle on the other line, crying profusely, asking me what had happened to Song. My cousin had arrived in Seoul deceased. All passengers got off the bus when it had arrived at the last stop, but Song wouldn't get off. The bus driver went over to him to wake him up, and that's when he learned Song was probably dead. The police and the ambulance had arrived not long after, and they pronounced him dead at the scene. Cause of death was determined as asphyxiation, but what they couldn't answer was how. The medical examiners ruled out choking. My cousin had no history of drug use or respiratory diseases, and he couldn't have inhaled anything toxic because all the other passengers on the bus were fine. Lastly, strangling was out of question since there were no signs of struggle or that he was attacked. Mom, Dad, and I all left to Seoul to pay our respects and to help with the funeral proceedings. I went to the funeral home a day before the funeral to see my cousin one last time, and when I looked at his face, I felt right away like I knew what had killed him. His mouth was wide open, as if in his last moments he was gasping for air, and at the same time he was horrified of something. I had never seen a face as mortified. They could have told me he died of extreme fear, and I would have believed them. I asked the funeral director if they could do anything about the mouth, and the man told me they had never seen a corpse like Song's. Not only were his eyes also a struggle to get them to shut, but his mouth just wouldn't close, so they had informed my uncle that they'll have to dislocate Song's lower jaw and run wires through the upper jaw to keep them shut. They told me that the technique was used often, so what they found peculiar was the extreme angle the mouth was open and how hard it was to shut it closed. In the end, they managed to make Song look somewhat normal, and the funeral proceeded accordingly. A couple of months later, I went back to Seoul at my uncle's place to start the new semester of college. I had heard from Aunt that uncle's health was deteriorating, but it was only when I arrived at their place that I realized, in fact, she was understating his condition. Uncle looked like a cadaver with barely a layer of skin that still made him look alive. Barely. He could hardly speak and ate practically nothing. That night, as I got ready for bed, I saw Aunt come out of her bedroom and lying down on the couch to sleep. I went up to her and asked why she slept in the living room. She put her head down as her shoulders drooped. She said, "I feel like I'm a terrible wife for saying this, but your uncle has these episodes he goes through every night. He has a hard time breathing, whimpers, and sometimes screams like a madman. I have to take care of him throughout the day, and I can't continue doing that if I don't get some sleep at night. It's not something that I can help him with, so I let him sleep alone." I gave her a hug, helped her lie down, straightened the blanket for her, and told her I would take care of him for a few days, since school wouldn't start for another 4 days. My uncle and aunt were wonderful to me. My parents tried to pay them for the trouble of taking me in, but they refused every time, and most of all, they've always treated me like their own son. I wanted to repay the debt in some way, no matter how minuscule the gesture, and I think I also felt guilty about my cousin's death. It wasn't my fault, but the last time he was alive, he was at my place, and for anyone else, I would have easily been someone to blame for the tragedy. I turned off the light in the living room and went back to my room to call it a night. I left my uncle's and my door open so that I'd know if he called for help. I fell asleep. The thought of my uncle must have stayed in the back of my mind as I slept, because I woke up to a very faint sound of him whimpering. I get up and walk toward his room. The living room is dark, so I walk carefully to not step on anything. As I get closer to Uncle's room, I notice Aunt is already inside tending to his needs. I turn around to go back to my room, and that's when I hear someone exhaling deeply. The sound came from the couch from the opposite end of the living room where Aunt was sleeping. So then, who did I see in my uncle's room? I stop dead in my tracks, then reluctantly turn around and see a black figure standing on top of my uncle's chest. Uncle continues to whimper, and even though I'm scared half to death, I push forward toward the door. The black figure becomes clearer as I get near it, and I could make out an outline of a woman. I could now hear it whisper my cousin and friend's name. It continues to whisper the names until I get close enough and it notices me. Then, in a blink of an eye, it rushes toward me, making a shrieking noise, and it disappears. It should have knocked me over, pushed me aside or something, but no, it just disappeared. I rush over to my uncle, turn on the light, and see his face filled with fear. He tries to catch his breath, but no matter how many gasps of air he takes in, it doesn't seem enough to stabilize him. Aunt is awoken and walks in on me as I'm saying, "Uncle, what's wrong? What can I do?" His eyes are fixated on the ceiling and he's unresponsive. I dial emergency services and all I can do is wait for the ambulance. The ambulance arrived about 10 minutes later, but it was too late. Uncle took his last breath 5 minutes prior, and his chest was soaked with Aunt's tears. He passed away that night, and because I was the first person to tend to him when he began having difficulty breathing, I was asked series of questions by the police, the medical staffs, and by my aunt. I told them everything for the exception of the woman I saw. I knew what I saw and was sure she was real, but I wasn't about to tell anyone that a ghostly woman had killed my uncle. My parents arrived the next day, and the first thing they did was to move me out of my aunt's place. I told them I should take care of Aunt and that she needed someone beside her, but they wouldn't have it any other way. Mom ended up staying with Aunt for the next 2 weeks, and Aunt became more frail as the days went by. She became unresponsive on week 3, and we had to hospitalize her. The doctors had no clue as to what was happening to her. A couple of days after Aunt's hospitalization, I received a call from Dad when I was having lunch in school cafeteria. He asked me if I could come home for a few days, and when I asked him why, he told me my friend Kim was ill, very ill. He told me that Kim wanted to speak to me and that it was urgent because he wasn't getting any better. I took the first bus back home that afternoon and arrived at around 9 p.m. I dropped off my stuff at my parents' place and went straight to Kim's house. Kim looked dreadful, like all life was sucked out of him. He could still sit upright and communicate, but he wasn't in much better condition than my uncle's before he passed away. I was in his room with his mom as when he asked her if she could give us some time to ourselves. As soon as she walked out of the room, he says, "It's the curse. She killed your cousin, then your uncle, and now she's doing the same to me. I should have listened to you. I should have never disrespected her like that. What do I do now? Please tell me something." I don't know the curse any better than Kim does, so what kind of advice could I give him? I just asked, "Did you see her?" And he answered, "Yes, I have. Did you?" I told him the truth. I saw her once on the night when my uncle passed away. The look in the eyes of Kim was of helplessness and terror. I wish I knew how I could fix this, but we both knew there isn't such thing. We both grew up in this town and know pretty much all the scary stories that were told through the years. No one, not one person ever mentioned how to break the curse. So I said the only thing I could think of. You should go back to the field and apologize to her. Plead for your life and forgiveness. What else can you do? Kim then looked at me and asked, "That could work, right? If I'm regretful and truly sorry, she would know, right?" The truth is, I had no clue. But there was no point in just telling him to wait and die. So I said to him, "You gotta try. You gotta try something. I'll get you to..." I was about to tell him that I'd take him to the field later tonight when I heard my dad calling for me from outside. I opened the door and went out to see him. "Son, your aunt passed away. We gotta leave to Seoul right now. Your mom needs us there." Kim looked at me in horror, fully realizing he was the next on the chopping block. I told him I was sorry, but that I couldn't take him to the field. I said to his younger brother to take Kim to the field at night, but discreetly when everyone's asleep. Obviously, he was puzzled, but he agreed anyways, and I left to Seoul right away with my dad. Aunt passed away in her sleep. I can't be sure, but maybe her final hours were not as horrific as my uncle's. We busily prepared for Aunt's funeral for the next few days until I received the news that Kim had passed away back home. Losing so many loved ones in such short period of time was taking a toll on me. I ended up opting to take the semester off and headed back to my hometown after my aunt's funeral. Back home, Kim's funeral had already taken place, and even though people in town had initially come to the funeral to pay their respects, afterward everyone made sure to keep their distance from the Kim family. Word spread. They all knew my cousin, uncle, and aunt had died under questionable circumstances, and now a perfectly healthy young man got ill one day, kept getting weaker, and eventually died. No one wants to go near that. I later spoke to my friend's brother about the circumstances surrounding Kim's death, and he told me there was no rational explanation for it. He took Kim to the field on the night my aunt passed away. He said Kim cried profusely and asked for forgiveness for over an hour. Nothing happened at first, but then it started raining sometime later. He went to get his brother in the field, but Kim shouted at him to get out and to never enter the field ever again. Kim was so adamant and angry that his brother backed away. Kim's brother continued to watch him by the outside boundary of the field, all the while getting soaked in the rain. About an hour into the whole deal, he saw her. The brother saw her too. He said the woman stood right in front of Kim. Then she repeatedly said the names of his brother and my cousin. Kim got up, but he looked like a possessed man, like he had no control over his body. He then collapsed like a rag doll. The woman vanished, and his brother never regained consciousness. Kim was taken to the hospital right after, but his condition was perplexing even for the doctors. They couldn't help him. I asked Kim's little brother if he noticed anything unusual on the night of Kim's passing. He paused for thought, then said, "He opened his eyes right before he passed away. His lips turned black and his body was completely stiff. I spammed the nurse call button, then tried to set him straight. I thought maybe that would help him breathe, but I couldn't move him at all. It felt like his body was anchored to the floor. I put my hand over his mouth because it didn't feel like he was breathing, and sure enough, I felt nothing." The nurse came first, and then the doctors. They tried desperately to help him breathe again, but he was done for in less than a minute after they arrived. He was pronounced dead a few minutes thereafter, and that was it. That's the last time I saw my brother alive. Months went by, and during that time, more bad news followed. My friend's brother died in a horrible car accident. He was hit by a bus that went out of control. It ended up crushing him against the wall. They said he was unrecognizable, and they basically had to scoop his body parts off the sidewalk. A week later, his mother committed suicide. She hung herself at her home. I can't say that it had anything to do with the curse, because it may have been just too much for a mother to bury two of her sons. Then about 3 months later, his father was stabbed to death in his room. The police said it was robbery gone wrong, but it didn't make sense because nothing was stolen. Their rationale was that the burglars came to rob what they presumed was an empty house, but they panicked when they saw Kim's father and they had killed him. I don't know, he was stabbed 24 times with a kitchen knife and absolutely nothing was taken from the house. Maybe it's just me, but it doesn't seem like a robbery gone wrong. When it was all said and done, 7 people lay 6 feet under in less than 12 months. My cousin, his mom and dad, my friend, his mom and dad and brother. At least it came to an end. She had fulfilled her curse, and no more tragedy struck my hometown afterwards. I went on to graduate college, got a nice job, bought an apartment in Seoul, and I even got rid of my dialect accent. For the first 2 years after landing a cushy job in Seoul, I thought I was happy. I had made new friends, I frequented clubs and bars over the weekend, and was dating girls I had only dreamt of when I lived in my humble hometown. It took 5 years for me to realize I was born a country kid and longed for a life with one. In spite of my parents' protests, I quit my job, sold my apartment, and moved back to my hometown. I couldn't have been happier back home, but by this point in time, my mom had gotten too weak to work the field full time, so much of our land was not farmed for a long period of time and became infertile. I worked my butt off to make the land arable again, and we had many seasons of successful cultivation in the following years. More good things came when I met a nice young woman, and we soon got married. We had a son together, and when he turned 7, we had to make a tough decision to move my wife and son out of town because our local school had closed down a few years back. It's been 3 years since then, and I'm now finally ready to join my family in the city. I sold our land, the house, and I'll be moving out for good in a few days' time. My town is changing. For better or worse, the farms are disappearing, and large corporations have begun building houses for upper middle-class families. These homes cater specifically for people who work in the nearby business district, those who prefer to live in the laid-back countryside, without the hassle of working the land, of course. The construction's almost finished, and the city folks will soon be moving in. The land that used to belong to my old friend's family is on the opposite end of my former land, and that's where the houses are being constructed. When I move out, the construction company will continue to pressure my neighbors to sell their land, and eventually the entire town will transform into something I couldn't recognize. I've made my peace with it. It's no use fighting progress, especially when it benefits the rich and the powerful. The only concern I've got is for the building that's being built on the cursed land. They plan to build an elementary school for the children of the new residents, and it's too late to even attempt to stop them because the foundation has already been laid. Earlier today, I went to see the construction site from close up and noticed there were many contingent workers on site. They are temporary contract workers who come and go depending on the need of the construction company. As per normal procedure, the man in charge called out the names of the people who work on that day, and some had answered the call by saying yes, but then there were those who repeated their names. There were exactly 5 people who had said their names, and as soon as the third person repeated his name, something tugged inside me and I regurgitated everything I had for breakfast. What would happen to those poor people? Contingent workers already live harsh lives, and now without even knowing, they've cursed themselves for what's probably some measly daily wages. I'm afraid many tragedies will follow until the end of the construction, but then that will only be the beginning of the nightmare. I think of the horror that will ensue when the school is open and children fill the classrooms. It makes me sick to my stomach. If I try to warn anyone about the curse, everyone will ignore me or label me crazy. I know there's no way to stop this, but even so, I don't know how I'll continue to live with the guilt of knowing what will happen and not having done anything about it. Is there any way to appease the spirit? Can I do anything to break the curse? Please, someone, anyone, please tell me. And that's the end of the story. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I've got an important announcement to make. Well, maybe not that important, but certainly relevant to all my viewers. I don't know if you noticed the subtle improvement in audio quality, but if you did, that's because of the remodeling that I did to my study. I've been using one of my upstairs bedroom as my study, and that's where I do all my recordings. The audio quality of my videos has improved a lot after I changed the old cardio mic I used to use to a newer and better one, but there still was a problem with the slight echo in all of my narrations. The source of the audio problem was of course the lack of soundproofing and sound dampening. A bedroom doesn't really make a good recording studio. To remedy this slight annoyance, I bought a bunch of acoustic dampening foams and pretty much plastered 70-80% of the room with the material. I know most people haven't noticed the issue, but for those who have, I just wanted to let you know the echo problem is now a thing of the past. And now for the announcement. I got a new job at a bigger, more upscale restaurant. I actually got the job about a month ago, but I had to stick around at the old restaurant for a while to make sure my old boss had enough time to look for a new executive chef, and also because I needed the time to train the new chef who's replacing me. So you might be asking, good for you, but what does it have to do with me or this channel? And now I'll explain the what. My contract with the new restaurant starts in mid-July. I pushed the date as far back as I could because I thought the search for the new chef at my old restaurant would take much longer. But the job market for chefs is so dry right now that about 50 people showed up for the interview, and finding the right man for the job wasn't a difficult task. So from now to when I start at the new restaurant, I got a little over a month of free time, and in that time, I intend to make and publish a ton of videos for you guys. Additionally, one of the biggest reasons why I took the job at the new restaurant is the fantastic schedule. They only open for dinner for the exception of Friday and Saturday, as many upscale restaurants do, so my work hours are much shorter while I get paid much better. The new restaurant is also well staffed, so I'm confident my work schedule will be kept as stipulated under contract, unlike the old restaurant where I had to work many overtime hours. So what it boils down to is that I'll have much more time for everything. Personal time, time for this channel, and everything else that needs my attention. With that said, you should expect a lot more uploads than before, even when I go back to work in mid-July. I'm responsible for the entire operation, so I'll be working 5 to 7 days depending on the time of the year, but nonetheless I'll be working far less hours than I have in the old restaurant. The lack of contents that went on for about 2 months stops today. The past 2 weeks I had very little time to work on my videos because of the work that I was doing in my study, turning it into an amateur recording studio. But that's all finished now, so I feel that I've made all the improvements I could make in terms of equipment, software, and location. And by location, I mean the place where I do the recordings. All that is left is for me to improve as a narrator and video editor, and that, I believe, will come with experience. Anyways, I personally am very happy that I'll be able to work on my videos a lot more from here on, and hopefully that's good news for you guys as well. Thanks for listening. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you on the next video.